A bill aimed at cracking down on misinformation and disinformation on the internet has been pulled by the federal government. The bill failed to gain support in the Senate, with the Greens and Coalition against it.
The government's proposal to ban or restrict gambling advertising has also been delayed. Our political reporter Stephanie Dalzell joins us now for more on this. Steph, just tell us more about this development on the mis and disinformation bill.
So this bill to tackle misinformation and disinformation on social media has now been dumped after the federal government failed to get the Greens on board. Now, under the proposed legislation, the bill would have pressured big tech companies to crack down on misinformation and disinformation on their platforms. The Coalition had been firmly against it, saying that it could be used to censor arguments, and it used The Voice as an example of that. We've also heard a lot from constitutional lawyers throughout this process, also questioning whether or not social media platforms should be allowed to define truth. Now, the Greens have said they'll vote this bill down in the Senate, which means there's no path forward given that the Coalition also is against it. Let's take a listen to the Greens spokesperson Sarah Hanson Young on Insiders earlier, explaining why they won't support the bill.
Badly and poorly explained and implemented. The practical implementation was just not there. And that's true. And mis and disinformation is a problem right around the world. It's not just in Australia. We've seen it unfolding in the US during this election. But unless you deal with it properly, rather than this kind of half-baked option, which is what the government had put on the table, trying to be all things to all people.
That's Sarah Hanson Young there. And Steph, what about the government's gambling ad ban legislation? What's the latest there?
So we understand the federal government isn't going to introduce this legislation to Parliament this week, which is the final week of the parliamentary sitting calendar. After that, it all wraps up for the year. Labor had landed on a model to limit gambling ads before 10 p.m. and also to ban them during children's programs, but that fell short of a total gambling ad ban that some Labor MPs had been agitating for. So there's been tension over exactly what this ad ban or ad restriction will look like. Now, the government maintains there's a future for this legislation and says it's still its intention to introduce this legislation this term of government. But given that Parliament's wrapping up this week, it's due to return early next year in February, but the government might call an election before then, which means it might not return. Parliament, this term of government, might not return next year. So basically what that all means is the future of this legislation is very much in doubt.
All right, Stephanie Dalzell there in Parliament House in Canberra. Thank you.